In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at a really cool, low-cost, multi-room audio streaming system. This system provides similar functionality to the likes of Sonos, where you can have multiple speakers in different rooms all playing the same audio together or stream to them all separately. It has a fully local API that integrates really nicely with Home Assistant, and it's extremely affordable. In fact, this version here, the S10 Plus, only costs £50. So yeah, let's talk about it. So the particular product range we're looking at here is from a company called Arylic, who have a massive range of multi-room audio streaming products. For this video, we'll be taking a look at the S10 Plus, which is a fairly entry-level model that just has a standard line output to connect to external powered speakers, but they do a bunch of different models we'll talk about shortly. Some that have built-in amplifiers, some rack mount models. They have a really comprehensive range, and they're all really affordable with a fully local API, which is absolutely fantastic. So now let's take a look at it. So we got it in the box here. I'm not going to do a full tour of the box, but I'll just talk about some of the services it supports. So obviously this is generally designed for streaming audio. So it supports basically all the streaming services you'd care about: Spotify, Amazon Music, Tidal, Apple AirPlay, slight catch, we'll talk about that in a minute, TuneIn. You can even just simply give this a URL to an internet radio stream or even a URL to an MP3 file and it will just play it. It's really, really good for sort of local control. It can also operate as a USB DAC, which is quite cool. And it also has the option to pull music off of like a NAS that supports DLNA and things like that. So it's really pretty comprehensive and pretty powerful. Now, for my setup here, we'll probably talk about that in a minute. I'm probably just going to be using this really as a Spotify casting destination, but it's great to have a lot of flexibility. These things are really, really powerful. So taking a look at what you get in the box, you get a manual. Not going to care about that. You get a device itself that we'll take a look at very shortly. I'm not going to go into the box in too much detail. You get an RCA to 3.5mm cable, which is really nice it's included. I didn't expect this and actually bought extra cables for this, but it actually includes both an RCA to 3.5mm cable and a 3.5 to 3.5mm cable. Very nice to get. A USB-C cable for power or for that USB DAC support. A basic USB power supply. Meh, you've got one if you need it. And then also infrared remote control. Now, I'm not going to be using the remote control for this. Obviously, it has full local network integration and this will be going out in my comms rack, so I have no use for the remote control, but it's nice to get one if you care about that sort of thing. And then we have the device itself. So it's a very small little device. Doesn't feel like the best built thing in the world. It does feel fairly cheap, but given this costs £50 for this level of functionality, I'll let this sort of slightly cheap plastic slide. So on the front of the device, you get a little display. It's just a few LEDs that kind of show the mode it's in. Some buttons on the top that they seem to be sort of touch sensitive. They're not actually pressing buttons, but they do work okay for my testing. And then around the back, you get some ports. So on this model here, which is the most entry-level sort of S10 Plus, you get Ethernet, so you can hardwire this to the network, or it supports Wi-Fi. I'll be hardwiring it. You get a USB-A connection. You can use this to connect, say, a flash drive with a bunch of music on it and play files from that. You've then got 3.5mm line in and line out, so you'll connect line out to your speakers, and then it also has the option to connect a line in source into this that you can switch to from over the network. So for example, you could have this connected to your speakers, have another device connected to the line in, have this playing all your streaming audio, and then over the network, tell this to switch to the line in, and it'll pass that through. So that's quite a nice feature to have. Optical out, so you could connect this to an external DAC, or for example, an AV receiver, and then your DC USB-C connection that would also be used for the USB DAC functionality. So this is the most entry-level model, as I kind of mentioned, but they have a massive range. So you can get other models in the range that have built-in amplifiers that you can connect to passive speakers. They have models that support things like HDMI ARC in, so you can send audio from a TV directly into it. They have ones with optical audio in and out, phono stages, all that sort of stuff. They have a massive range of these sorts of devices. On top of that, they also sell a range called Up To Stream, which essentially is just a bare PCB from a device such as this. So if you wanted to, say, build that into your own product, so you wanted to, say, build some sort of speaker and have some sort of amplifier with music streaming functionality built into that, you could buy one of those boards and integrate it into your project. So it's quite good for people who are into the sort of custom audio side of things. In addition to that, they also offer some rack mount models. And while they look really nice, I just couldn't really justify the price for my use case. They have a basic rack mount model that has 4 different zones on it, so it has 4 separate outputs, 4 separate stereo outputs in a single 1U rack mount case. And that would be absolutely perfect, but it's £800. Whereas this is £50, and essentially you buy 4 of these and you basically get the same result. Now, sure, it wouldn't be in a nice rack mount case. It has the rack mount one has RCA output, it's got a few more ports. It has a single network port rather than needing multiple network interfaces for 4 of these. But I couldn't really justify £800 versus £100 for 2 of these. So yeah, But if you're in a much higher end environment and sort of money is less of an issue and you just want the best sort of option and you really want something rack mount, they do offer that. They even offer a rack mount version that has 4 separate stereo zones and has built-in amplifiers. So that could be even better for a setting like that. Although one of those costs, I think it's around about £2,000. So £2,000 for that versus 4 of their models that have amplifiers would cost a lot less. So the rack mount models do look really nice, but they're just a bit too expensive for my sort of situation here. The only warning I would give if you're buying something like this is just to watch out for the versions that are Bluetooth only. Of course, if all you care about is a Bluetooth device, then that's great. But if you're wanting to buy one that's got Multiroom streaming over a network with all the network integration, you need to make sure you buy one that is actually a network device, because they do have a range of models both as standard preamplifiers with line out and amplifiers that are only Bluetooth. And some of those do still advertise an app, but of course the app just controls over Bluetooth. So they're not a problem, they're probably great devices, but just don't assume that every device that Arylic sell is a network streaming device. Some of them are Bluetooth only, so just watch out for that. So the next question is, what am I using these for? Now, if you've seen my update video, I gave a sort of sneak preview of my Multiroom audio setup I'm building out. And if you haven't seen that, definitely check that out. And there'll be a lot of future videos coming on that and going into a lot of detail. Now, with my setup there, I'm doing something a lot more complicated than using these to provide the Multiroom capability. Essentially, I have a massive audio DSP that can route all the audio to all the different rooms, separate amplifiers. It's a massive, overcomplicated, stupidly powerful setup. So I'm not going to be using the Multiroom capability of these. But what I need is some sort of device, ideally a couple of them, that I can feed into that system, just to allow me to do things like cast Spotify. So all I really need is some sort of networked Spotify receiver, something that can receive internet radio streams, things like that. So that's why I've bought 2 of these devices, just to have these connected into my Multiroom audio setup, into the DSP, and then I can cast audio to these and it can feed the audio into the system. And these devices are great because the fact that they have completely local API and they integrate really nice with Home Assistant means I can use Home Assistant to control it. I can easily check the power state of these. I can easily interact with them. I could, for example, have a button in a Home Assistant dashboard for a particular radio station. When you press that, it would trigger one of these to play that radio station. These are just absolutely perfect for that use case, even if I'm not using the Multiroom capability. But as I mentioned, these do have full Multiroom capability, so you don't need to go to a complete over-the-top setup like I do. You could just buy a bunch of Arylic devices, put them throughout your house, connect them all to the network, and use them as a Multiroom audio setup. They actually work pretty nicely. In that previous video, you might have also seen that I was using a pair of Chromecasts plugged into my HDMI matrix switch and using that as an audio source. Because my matrix switch has regular line level balanced audio outputs, so I was just extracting the audio from the Chromecasts and passing them in. And it worked okay, but it just wasn't great, because those Chromecasts are generally designed for use with, well, connected to TVs. And while you could just cast them from the Spotify app and control them like that, the main issue I found was that Spotify has an annoying tendency nowadays that if it's playing on a device that has a screen, that it'll play music videos rather than the regular tracks. So what would happen is you'd start a song playing, you wouldn't have a TV on, you would just be listening to the audio, but because it was playing to a Chromecast, it thought it was connected to a TV, it would play the music video version of the song, and you get one of those annoying situations where, like, I'm in the shower with music on, playing over the ceiling speaker, it's all great, and then it's one of those stupid songs that halfway through the track, they decide to have a car chase, and then it suddenly cuts from the music, and you're hearing the stupid car chase audio before the song comes back in. And you could go into the app at that point and then say, no, I want to just have the audio, but then it would restart the track from the beginning. It just wasn't ideal. The Chromecasts just weren't perfectly suited for completely displayless audio playback, whereas these devices should be absolutely perfect for that. Okay, so now let's set this up and try it out. So I've got a single speaker here to test with. Of course, there's no point setting up stereo for this, so we've got plugged into a single speaker with a 3.5mm RCA cable, and then we're going to plug into the line out jack on the back of the Arylic device. I'm then also going to connect it into the network over Ethernet, although this does support Wi-Fi, but I may as well just hardwire this over Ethernet because that's what I'll be doing when I actually set these up live. So we'll plug the Ethernet in there like that. Should probably get a longer Ethernet cable for that, but that'll work fine if I just do that. That's now connected over Ethernet. And to power it, I'm going to plug it into a USB-C power supply. And thankfully this does actually work with a proper USB-C power delivery supply. I've done videos on things previously where they only work on a basic USB power supply that outputs 5 volts. This is plugged into like a MacBook charger and it works absolutely fine, so that's pretty good. So plug that in there. It's now going to start up. So you can see right now it's flashing the Wi-Fi LED, that's just it booting up. And once it boots up and gets a network and gets an IP address, that'll go solid and it'll be up and running. And with that little noise there, it's now up and running. So now straight away this is back up and on the network, And it's now working. So I'll just quickly show what you can see on my phone here. So this app is called 4Stream, number 4 word stream. And this is the app for sort of controlling and managing these devices. It's completely local, no account required setup or anything like that. You just open the app, it finds the devices on the network, and they all show up here. By default, they have a kind of randomized sort of name. I've just renamed this to Streaming A, and I'll have the other one being Streaming B. You can just rename it from the settings. It's very easy to come in here, set a different name. Loads of options here for different things you can set up. There's a built-in EQ, things like that. Fade in, fade out, so you can fade in and fade out between tracks, things like that. And then in here you can do various settings. So for example, you can go to browse, you can pick different services you want to stream to this. It kind of just opens the app. I think TuneIn is built into this app, so if you want to play internet radio, it's built in through this app. That's quite cool. But yep, you don't have to use this app, but it does allow you to kind of pick different streaming services. You can also change the source in here. So as I mentioned earlier, you can use the things like the line in. So if it's set to Wi-Fi, that means this will play any kind of network streams. Even if it's on Ethernet, it calls it Wi-Fi. So that's things like Spotify, TuneIn, that kind of thing. You can also pick Bluetooth and then connect this over Bluetooth. You can pick line in, which will pass the line in on this out to the speakers, or use it as a USB DAC. And different Arylic devices will have different combinations of inputs and outputs, so you can kind of configure them in here. In here, you'd also handle things like the multi-room grouping, but I won't go into that right now. We'll take a look at that in a dedicated bit later in the video. But yep, that's now showing up in the app here. So what we can now do is cast music to this. So I've got Spotify open here. I've got some YouTube audio library music lined up. So what I can now do is go into here, I've got my list of various devices on my network. This one is called Streaming A. So we can pick Streaming A there. I'm now reconnected to that. And if I hit play, it'll start playing. Quite loudly. And that's working. Works absolutely perfectly, so we can pause that there. That's now streaming, so I'm now able to stream Spotify to this device and play it out the speaker. This thing basically works completely out of the box. The next feature I want to take a look at is casting Apple AirPlay to this, because that also works. So I've got my laptop here and I've got a video lined up on it, and we'll demonstrate AirPlay, because there's one catch that might be a slight issue depending on what you're planning on using this for. So we've got the laptop here. We can then simply go to the speaker menu up here. That'll show various devices on my network, including Streaming A, which is this Arylic device. So we can click that there. And now the laptop's audio will be streamed to the Arylic device over AirPlay. So if I start this video, I'll do something a little bit different and just do it. You can now hear the video playing. Update video. Because as you see my most recent but if I zoom in a bit closer to my face, you might see a bit of an issue here. It's been very eventful with a lot of content. So what I thought I'd do is I'd go through the sort of stuff we've done over the last few months, sum a lot of it up, take a look at the sort of end result of a lot of it. As you can see there's really large audio latency when you're using AirPlay between a MacBook and this device. So what this basically means is if you're wanting to use AirPlay for this, if all you're planning on doing is streaming audio, just things like music, things like that, that should be fine. You just need to maybe expect a bit of a delay between pressing play and the audio coming out the device. But on the other hand, if you're planning on using this to stream, say, a video, it's not really going to work for that, unfortunately. So just something to bear in mind, because that latency basically means you couldn't, say, cast a video to this, watch the video on your laptop and listen to the audio out your speakers. That latency would be far too high. But for playing music, it's fine. So just something to bear in mind there. It does support AirPlay, but there's quite a delay and it throws off sort of sync with video. But they do support AirPlay if you're okay with that limitation. So next up, let's take a look at the multi-room capability of these. It's going to be a little bit awkward to demonstrate because I've only really got one speaker here and you're listening through one microphone, so it'll be hard to demonstrate multi-room. So what I'm going to do is I've got two separate devices here, Streaming A and Streaming B, that's what I've called them. And I've got them coming out separate RCA cables, so what I'll just do is I'll plug each device into the speaker in turn and we can sort of listen to which device is working. You should hopefully be able to sort of hear that they're both playing essentially through multi-room. So right now we have Streaming A set up and I'm going to cast Spotify to it. So that's all set up there, and if I go into Spotify and press play, like that, you'll hear the music. Now if I leave that music playing, unplug device A, and instead plug in device B, right now, you're not going to hear anything, because the music's only playing through device A and not B. So what I can then do is set up multi-room. So if I then come into the 4Stream app, again this is all doable through Home Assistant or the API, which we'll take a look at later, we come into here, and we can now group them. So to do that, what you need to do is just pick a particular device and then pick the multiple devices you want to play against. So the way it works is you can kind of pick any device and then add other devices to it. So what will happen if I pick Streaming A and then add streaming B to that, anything I cast to streaming A will also play on B. Likewise, if instead I went into streaming B and added A to it, then to play to that multi-room group, I would cast to device B. So that's kind of what you do. You pick one device that's kind of the primary, and then you add other devices to it. So now those devices are grouped together. If I then come in here and start playback again, we hear music. I can then unplug that device and unplug the first one again, and it's playing. So now both of these devices are playing together. And that's happening in complete unison. Of course, I can't really demonstrate it here because I've only got one speaker set up, but previously when I've tested this, I've gone as far as plugging the left channel of one of these into one speaker, the right channel of the other one into the other speaker, and they're so well in sync that it just sounds like stereo music. There's no noticeable latency at all. It's really, really impressive. So yep, now both devices are playing the exact same music. The multi-room capability works really well. The next thing I want to take a look at is the line-in functionality of this. So to test that, I've got my laptop hooked up here, it's got some music lined up on this, connect over a 3.5mm cable into the line-in on one of these devices. So right now, if I start music playing on the laptop, you're not going to hear anything, because as you can see here, it's got the Wi-Fi LED illuminated, so it's still switched to the input for network streaming. But all we need to do is we can come into the app again over the API or through the buttons on the device itself. We go into the settings here, and we can change this from Wi-Fi to line-in. And we can now hear the music. Turn the volume up a little bit. Probably need to do it through the app itself, because there we go. We're hearing music. So that's the line-in functionality. So that music is now coming from the laptop over that line-in cable. And as you can see, the symbol on the front of the device has changed to show line-in. What we can even do with the line-in is actually still add these into a multi-room group, and the audio from the line-in on this device will be streamed to this device. So let's try that. So if we come into the app again, exactly the same as before, we're plugged into streaming A, so that's the primary device. We pick that into the group, we then add device B, press done, and those will now be put together into a group. So with that set up, we now start music playback on the laptop, like that, and we've got music. And then if we unplug this device and plug in the other one, we still get audio. So you can see here, potentially from this mess of cables, the laptop is plugged into this device here, but this device is the one that's actually connected into the speaker. And that audio streaming works absolutely fine, and just proves there's no magic. If I unplug the line in from the laptop, or unplug it from here, the music will stop. There you go. So that's working absolutely fine. But there is one catch with this multi-room sync when you're using line-in that you may have noticed when I did that test, when I unplugged that cable, or when I paused the music there. It adds a ton of latency to the audio. So to demonstrate this, once again I have the same video lined up as before. And we're connected back as before with line-in into the streaming A device, and this is also plugged directly into the speakers, and multi-room is not currently set up. So if I were to play this video, you'll see the speech sync works absolutely fine. If I turn it up a bit so you can hear better. If you've seen my most recent videos, it's been a pretty eventful year with a lot of brand new massive projects, all this stuff. It's been very eventful with a lot of content. So as you can see there's no issues around speech sync. So what I'm now going to do is I'm now going to add these devices into a multi-room group. So we're going to come in, so I'm going to start the video playing again. As you can see, the sync is absolutely fine. We're now going to add the device B to start multi-room, press done. Now wait a second and watch what happens. Better than this camcorder for doing sort of shots and artistic stuff. And there we go. Now you can see the issue. They're now completely out of sync with speech. And I basically use it on automatic. So I'm not really using this to its creative potential and realistic. And as you see, I paused it there and my voice kept going. So what seems to happen is when you add them into multi-room group, it works okay at first because it's setting everything up. But then what it appears to do is work out the kind of latency involved and the buffer needed for safe multi-room network streaming, and then adds that in. So what happens is both devices get the same latency added. So in some ways that's good. So this testing here, I was actually playing the audio from the same device, the line and cable it was going into. So it means that if you've got multiple devices in different rooms within earshot of each other, you don't hear that kind of out of sync audio coming from different rooms. It puts all devices in sync together, but they will have a delay in comparison to the input signal. So that's just really important to bear in mind. And a bit like AirPlay, it means that this will work absolutely fine if all you're putting in is music. But if you wanted to play any sort of video content into this, you can't really do that with the multi-room streaming without losing lip sync. And that's why for my setup here, I'm using these as streaming destinations, but I'm using a separate DSP to handle all the multi-room capability. Because with my system here, I'm going to be very heavily sending audio from different TVs into the multi-room audio system to play out ceiling speakers and then route TV audios through to different rooms. And with this, I just wouldn't really be able to do that because of that sync issue. So what I would say for this is if you're planning on buying this and using the multi-room capability, if you're planning on only ever playing music and audio through it, sort of music, stuff like that, it's absolutely fine. Just don't expect to ever want to use this along with video playback because that audio sync just will become an issue. Just something to bear in mind, but it is nice that you could very easily have a device like this with some sort of audio source plugged into the line input, stream that through to a different room and get the audio out. And of course with other devices, things like HDMI, ARC, phono input, you could have a turntable in one room and stream it to different rooms. It's really pretty flexible. And at this price point, it's a very, very powerful system. So that was a look at the app side of things. But as you can imagine, I didn't buy this to set it up with the app. So let's take a look at the other options. So here is a web interface. So all I've done is just gone to the IP address of one of these devices on my network. Each obviously got their own IP and each has its own web interface. And you get this web interface. So through here we can control it now. If we start that right now, it'll ask for a password. I think by default the password's admin, but you can change it in here. So we can log into that. There we go. Now logged in there and I should be able to control it. So start play, stop it playing. And you can do various things in here. So you can configure various sort of EQ settings in here. You can change the inputs, so you can switch between the different inputs on the device like you can do through the app, but now through the web interface. You can switch to you can use the internet radio, and you can also set various presets, which I think are just kind of like, I think they're preset radio stations, preset EQs, things like that. Not really played with that setting, but you do have that option. You can also log out, which also I'm not going to do. And you've got basic settings for the device here. So you can rename it, which is really the main thing you'd want to do. You can set a static IP address, which you might want to do for these, because when you set up the multi-room using the API, you need to know the IP address of the devices. So you can set a static IP, and you can also change the password if you care about that. So that was a look at the web interface, but that's not the coolest part of this device. The main thing is that these devices have a full local HTTP API that's completely documented on the Arylic website, and it's really, really cool. So just a very quick test here, I've just used the playback control command. So I've got Postman set up here, just sending an HTTP GET request to the device. It's all just done through GET request. So we've got the IP address of the device here. We then have HTTP API command, set player command, one pause. And as you can see in the documentation, the one pause command toggles play and pause. So you can either have separate pause and resume, or you can have one pause, which will toggle between the two. And if I send that request, it'll start playing. Like that. If I send the request again, it'll pause. That API works brilliantly. The other command I can send here is one called get player status. So if I send that, that'll send back JSON that'll give me complete information about what the device is doing. So you can see what it's doing, it's paused. The title, artist and album look a bit weird because they're kind of hex encoded. They've sort of hexadecimal encoded all the individual characters. I think it's just so because presumably titles can have very weird foreign characters in them. They could potentially trip it up, so they've done that just for safety. But you could very easily decode those, volume, all that kind of stuff. And of course you could change all these settings if you wanted. This API is extremely powerful. Now I'm not going to go into too much detail digging through all this in this video, but if you go to this link, it will show you basically everything the API can do. So you can kind of work out what this can do and check it's capable of what you need before you buy anything. But realistically, this can do everything. You can tell all different playback controls. You can even just give it a URL to a network stream, such as an internet radio URL, send it to the device over the HTTP API, and it'll just play that radio station. Now, I'm not going to demonstrate that because there's no royalty-free radio stations as far as I'm aware, but that works brilliantly, and I've tested it, and it works fine. And then through this API, you can even manage the multi-room functionality, and it just uses the device's IP addresses as identifiers. So if I had, say, device A, and that's the one I want to stream the music to, so I want to send the music from Spotify to device A, and I want to add device B as a multi-room partner to that, what I would do is I would send the API command to device B, and I send this join group master command, and I then supply the IP address of device A. Once I do that, it'll then set up the multi-room. So I can even configure the multi-room directly over the API. It's so powerful. Of course, you do then need to use the IP address. This is where I was saying it's potentially useful to set static IP addresses on the devices, because with the app, it kind of does auto discovery, finds them on the network, does all that. Whereas if you were building something using the API, you probably just want the certainty of just having static IPs on the devices, but of course you can set that up if you want. And yeah, I really recommend just checking through his documentation. It's really comprehensive, really well documented, And the amount of stuff you can get from this API is really, really powerful. In fact, one thing I found that isn't documented in this, but is potentially worth playing with if you wanted, is through this API, I can't find a way to get like the album art. Whereas if you look at the web interface here, you do actually get the album art of the playing track. But what seems to happen is this web interface opens a WebSocket connection to the device, and that WebSocket connection gets periodic updates about the sort of track play status, and that also includes a URL to the album art. It's not officially documented anywhere, but you can easily enough dig into your browser developer console, find how that works, and you could then use that WebSocket connection if you wanted to, say, pull the album art out and put it into Home Assistant dashboard or something like that. The API is super powerful. But of course, you might not want to work completely with the API, and you don't really need to, because these devices also have a completely direct Home Assistant integration. Now, the integration is called LinkPlay. LinkPlay is the company that makes the chips that are used in these, so these use a kind of off-the-shelf network streaming module available from a company called LinkPlay. And these modules are available on other devices as well, not just Arylic, so you can potentially find other devices on the market that also have these LinkPlay network streaming modules and use them instead. So it uses the LinkPlay Home Assistant integration, and I found for my setup here, I just connected these to the network, they were auto discovered, and I can literally click one button and pull them into Home Assistant. It was super easy. So now we have both devices in here, so we have streaming A and streaming B, we go into device there, and in here we have the device. It shows up just as a media player entity in Home Assistant. I can start playback here, like that. Restart the track by accident because the button moved. You can pause it, all that works fine. Change the volume, that's completely controllable through here. Through here, you can also pick the source. So if you wanted to, say, switch your media player to a line input or Bluetooth, you can do that through Home Assistant as well. You can pick the different EQ presets if you want. You can also go into Browse Media here. Now, there's options in here for picking things like media stored in Home Assistant. I haven't tested with that, but I have confirmed that if you actually use the radio browser in Home Assistant, you can pick a radio station, and that works. It streams it to the device. I presume Home Assistant just sends a URL through to the device, but even that works. So these work absolutely brilliantly through Home Assistant. And through Home Assistant, you can even control the multi-room capability. So right now, we've got device A connected into the speaker, and the music is set to play on device A. So if I start that playing, music starts playing. Now, I'm going to unplug device A, and then I'm going to plug device B into the speaker. And right now, because only device A is playing and they're not in the multi-room group, you don't hear any audio coming out the speaker. But then through Home Assistant, all we need to do is issue a mediaplayer.join command. So I'm just doing this manually through the developer tools, but you could easily build an automation or button or interface element to control this. But we're saying mediaplayer.join. I wanted to join to streaming A, so I've picked that device there. And to that device, I want to join streaming B. So when I issue this command, it'll put them into multi-room group and we'll hear music. There we go. Very loud. Turn that down a bit. And that's now working. So now both devices are playing music. That works brilliantly. So yeah, the Home Assistant integration works fantastically. So even though it has that super powerful API, I don't think I'm actually going to need it. I'm pretty sure I can do everything I need to do just through the Home Assistant integration. And then finally, for a bit of fun, I thought let's pop one of these open and see what's inside, just to see what they're made of. So I've already taken the little rubber feet off just because there's screws under there. So if I take all these screws out, we should see inside. And I'm kind of interested to see how this is built, because Arylic are quite open, saying that they use those LinkPlay streaming modules to actually handle the sort of network side of things. And then their board kind of handles some other parts of it. So it'd be really interesting to see how that works. Is there just like a separate board in there that handles the streaming? Kind of cool to see how these are built. So yeah, pop this open. Equally, it's probably very similar to their kind of up-to-stream boards, because you can literally buy this type of device in PCB form from them. But yeah, if we take those 4 screws out like that, let's get my magnetic screwdriver. There we go. And then get this open. So I don't know how it's going to come out now because it's unscrewed, but it's maybe a bit fiddly. Ah, okay, so with those screws removed, the top then comes off. That makes more sense. Cool, and that's the inside. So yeah, I'll take a closer look at this and then I'll come back and kind of talk about what I find. Okay, so I've had a bit more of a look at this, so we can talk about what's inside. So it's a very, very simple device. What you've got here is, as I suspected, you've got a LinkPlay module. So this is a LinkPlay A31. So this module basically handles all of the network streaming functionality. So all the Spotify, your crossing destinations, all that kind of stuff is all handled by this board here. So that'll have some sort of processor on it, and that kind of handles the entire network side of things. Outside of that, there's not really much else on the board. I don't think there's really even any components under that. All you've really got is a few passive components, And then this chip here, which is a BP1048B2. And this is a Bluetooth DSP chip. So this will handle the Bluetooth communication. So streaming audio to this over Bluetooth is done by this chip, as well as kind of all the DSP functionality. So that's going to presumably include things such as switching the sources around, so switching between the line in and the device and the link play module, all that input source switch will be handled by this. It may be also handling things like the EQ. I'm not sure whether that's done by this or this. I really don't know. But yeah, that's kind of what you've got. So this is the DSP here that's kind of handling some of the side things, but then all the streaming is handled by this kind of integrated link play module, which is pretty cool. So yeah, it's pretty nice how they've kind of just reused that part, and then that part just gets reused across their entire range of things. They might have a few different versions of it, but yeah. And then in terms of antennas, you can also see the difference because the link play module has one antenna onto it, and the main PCB has a different antenna. So this one here presumably will be the Wi-Fi antenna, and this one here that's connected next to the DSP chip would be the Bluetooth antenna. So yeah, very, very simple construction, but looks absolutely fine. Oh, and one very final thing I just spotted while putting it back together is on the back of the lid, you've then got a very simple PCB here, which just has these sort of basically metal pads going through a few components there to this connector. So this will be handling the kind of capacitive touch sensitive buttons on the front, and then that will just plug into presumably that header there on the main board when it goes back together. So if you are taking these apart, also just be careful that that's there. Don't break those contacts off if you're being a bit rough with it. But yeah, that's the inside of it. So there you have it. That was a look at these absolutely awesome multi-room audio streaming devices from Arylic. They work brilliantly. Now obviously I'm just going to be using this as basic streaming destinations. I'm not going to be using the multi-room functionality, so they're going to be absolutely great for that. And the multi-room functionality also works really well, just as long as you bear in mind that audio sync issue. So don't buy these if you plan on sending video content between rooms, but for music it'll work absolutely fine. And they work brilliantly, and for the price point, these things are amazing value. Especially the fact that these have a completely local API, they're not relying on some sort of cloud service and cloud API that could be deprecated down the line. These devices are absolutely brilliant. They work great with Home Assistant. Realistically, apart from that audio sync issue, I can't fault them. So I would definitely recommend checking these out. It's also worth taking a look at their full range because these are just the basic S10 Plus that just have a line output, but they do a bunch more with built-in amplifiers. It's a really comprehensive product line, so definitely really fun to take a look at these, and I can't wait to play with them more in the future and maybe take a look at other products in the range because they're a really, really interesting product line. So there you go. Hope you found this interesting or potentially useful if you're looking for a very low-cost multi-room audio setup. And if you're interested in buying any of this, I'll put links in the description. But all left to say now is thank you very much for watching.